Scott James Merridew presents the 5 stages of grief over your laptop exploding. Stage 1, denial. Maybe if I do this, it'll work. No? Well, maybe if I do this. Stage 2, anger. Work, you fucking piece of shit! I own you! Stage 3, bargaining. Please, please work. Please, I'll give you anything. I'll give you anything. I'll update Windows on time, I swear. Just please come back to me. Stage 4, depression. Why? It's too soon. And finally, stage 5, acceptance. You know what? I'm fine with this. Yeah. So what if Alex has to take over the podcast for an episode? I mean, it's not like I can't afford a new laptop, or that the 100th episode is coming up, and everyone's counting on me to get the episodes out of the schedule. Oh God, I'm going back to depression. Oh, kill me now. This has been the 5 stages of grief over your laptop exploding by Scott James Merridew.
Welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. And this week, Scott's dead, so I get to talk about my favorite podcast. It's The Adventure Zone. Cue the music. Hello there, Capers, and as I said, welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. My name's Alex Mirabal, and this is the show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics, and are joined each week by a different, very special guest. This week, Scott's not actually dead. His computer is though, as you heard from that dramatization at the beginning, so I'm taking over. You might know me as the all-seeing, all-knowing editor of Podcapers, and the resident DCEU defender. Don't worry, Capers. Scott will make his triumphant return for our extra special episode 100. For this week, I am joined by a very good friend of mine and a former roommate, Miles Colombo. Hi, Miles.
Hi.
How's it going? How's your day going?
It's going pretty good. I took a really long nap, and it was great.
Yay, naps.
Yep.
So this is weird. I'm not used to hosting. I'm used to guesting, and this happened fairly out of nowhere with a very little planning.
Alex came up to me a couple of days ago and was like, "Hey, would you be willing to do a podcast with me?" And I'm like, "Sure, I guess." And now we're here.
Yep, yeah. I think the original plan was for Scott and Mark to talk about Volume 6 of RWBY. I haven't watched RWBY in over a year, so it's that wasn't a possibility. So yeah.
And I've never watched an episode.
Yeah, so yeah, that episode will probably come out after episode 100, because we have something very special planned, hopefully if all works out. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about The Adventure Zone, which I have begged to talk about in various formats for a very long time. I wrote a review of the first graphic novel in August, and it hasn't come out yet. It'll probably come out when it's more SEO applicable, probably when right before the release of the second graphic novel, which makes sense. And I'm super hyped for that. It took Scott's laptop and hard drive being destroyed for us to finally get to talk about it.
And I'm glad I could be here. I love The Adventure Zone, and I'm actually the person who got Alex into The Adventure Zone, and so it kind of is fitting, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was there as Alex listened to most of The Adventure Zone.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Capers, The Adventure Zone is an actual play D&D podcast, or was. It's still an actual play podcast. They just don't play D&D anymore. And it started as just a group of a family, 3 brothers and their dad, playing D&D and for shits and giggles and having fun, and developed into this meta, fantastical, just great story.
What happened is there's the podcast My Brother and Me, which is a advice podcast. It's one of the earliest. It started in like 2011 or something. And one of the brothers on it had a baby. And what they wanted to do for the episode where he was off, like for the birth of his child, they decided to play D&D. They planned to play a one-off. They picked random characters. They sort of took some of the preset ones, like an elf, wizard, a dwarven cleric, pretty standard stuff. And then the podcast with those characters lasted for 3 years. So the beginning sound is kind of awful. They didn't really know what they were doing. Most of them had never really played D&D before, but the one thing that like the Adventure Zone does right about D&D from the very beginning is that the important part is to enjoy yourself and to build stories with people. And it's one of the funniest pieces of media I think I've ever consumed. It is just hysterical, while also eventually becoming a deep, emotionally complex story, which I didn't expect, and I was glad to come across.
Yeah, I recently did my 3rd listen through of the show, which even just a cursory look at the podcast's page on iTunes is a feat. There are 69 episodes, each averaging about an hour. And then there's also live shows that are also about an hour they kind of can go in anywhere. It's a big task to listen to everything. But it honestly, like, even though it takes up so much time, it doesn't feel like a great effort. Once you're in it, you are in it, and there's no stopping that train.
Though I will say the beginning is a little tough to get into.
That's true.
The first arc is kind of terrible, and it's almost universally acknowledged to be so. It took me like 6 months to listen to the first 6 episodes, and then a month and a half to listen to the other 60.
Yeah, I think my thing with it was that it was the first time I'd ever listened to people play D&D, so it didn't feel like it still felt new to me. So I got through that first arc fairly quickly. I also very much enjoy their humor.
Yeah.
So even when it was just stupid, shitty, bad jokes, I was in.
That's super fair.
Yeah.
That's just not what I got. That's not what I got out of it. I spent a lot of it being just kind of a little bit confused and not necessarily as invested as I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, the story, because it starts out like pretty standard fantasy, and it very quickly becomes not that. Like, the game actually, so they're playing D&D, and one of the ways you can play D&D is with these preset modules. And one of the most common modules, a module Alex has run, is
twice.
The Lost Mines run twice. Is the Lost Mines of Phandelver.
It's the starter pack.
It's a starter pack, and that's what they start playing with. And so I'd already listened to, I think, 3 D&D podcasts at this point, and so I'd already heard people go through this mine more than once. And so I'm like, okay, fine, there's some wolves, and there's like a waterfall, blah, blah, blah. And so I wasn't super engaged by it at first. What actually I think is the biggest hook for the Adventure Zone is the characters. Mm-hmm. And the way the benefit of actual play, I think, is as compared to like other pieces of media, is of the main characters all get one person who is absolutely entirely devoted to that one character. And so those characters get this sort of incredible development you couldn't get anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really cool.
And you can see the personalities of the people playing them in these characters, but they're not like they're exaggerations of these people that, for a lot of people that are already into McElroy content, that's kind of the draw. But even then, like, that was my first McElroy content, was the Adventure Zone, and I immediately latched onto these big personalities with these awesome characters, and we should actually talk about those characters. So
We should.
Yeah. So Travis McElroy plays a human fighter whose name is Magnus Burnsides. Very much a generic idea of a big buff fighter. I think that's kind of the common theme, is that all three of these characters are generic in concept, but not at all in actual gameplay.
Exactly.
They are so different, and they all have these distinct personalities. Magnus is, all he wants to do is protect people, and he couldn't care less if that means that he gets hurt. But he's also kind of a shithead.
He like bullies a child for no reason and like throws a dog into a fire because that's what he thinks he's supposed to do. Like he's kind of like, he's impulsive and ridiculous, but also like ultimately good-hearted. I love Magnus dearly. The original concept for the character, Travis, who plays him, brought in like a several-page dramatic, angsty backstory that they immediately threw out. And we're like, okay, this is not the vibe we're going for. We don't want a character that is just like, oh, doom, gloom, blah, 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 blah. And eventually some of that came back, and they did get into a story that is actually kind of really touching, but it's not like melodramatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not at all in any way that it feels like too much. There's really nothing about the Adventure Zone that you really have to be like, look, this is gonna get into some dark shit. In reality, when they do touch on sad topics, it's never like, I mean, there's a lot of crying. Every time I listen to this show, there's a lot of crying, but it's never like something that I need to turn off and take a break. It is still something that is there's still something that motivates you always to go forward and keep enjoying, because 5 minutes after this super sad thing, they're going to make a really dumb joke.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of touches on what, and we'll get back to their characters in a second, but I want to touch on what I think is the ultimate, like, best part about the Adventure Zone. Like, if you break it down to, like, the very basis parts, the Adventure Zone is a story, at least the Balance arc. Amnesty, the first arc is one we're talking about mostly. It's called Balance. And Balance, I think, ultimately is a story about hope. And about, like, the power that, like, connections you have with the power and the importance of connections you have with other people. And that is something that you don't get, like, it's often really cheesy or scoffed at, instead of being treated like a real genuine part of what, like, being a human is.
Yeah.
And so I always, it gave me hope just to listen to these characters, like, really work together and overcome some, like, ridiculous things. And sometimes it was funny and sometimes it was heartbreaking, but it was always hopeful.
Yes. And so moving on in characters, I think that's also the epitome of Magnus, is hope.
Yeah, exactly. Magnus is gone. He goes through some bad stuff and comes out of it brighter.
Yeah. So next up, Justin McElroy
oh man,
plays. It's probably one of the best character name reveals ever. And unfortunately, that is something that we're going to have to spoil for you guys. His name is spelled Taako, which of course is pronounced taco. He is a high elf wizard, and he's a lot.
He's terrible. He's terrible, and I love him.
He's mostly known as Taco, from TV, despite the fact that there is, of course, no TV in this fantasy world.
Which the DM keeps telling him, there's no TV, oh my god, there's no TV in this world. But he rolls with it.
Yeah, he is...
Taco's selfish and ridiculous and brilliant.
Starts out being such a massive dumbass.
That also.
Yeah, it's like obvious Justin is trying to go for this really dumb, like, I'm just gonna cast magic whenever I feel like and only work for myself kind of guy. And Taco fights against that and becomes this probably one of the smartest characters on the show.
Yep.
And of course wizards kind of are supposed to be smart. They're very much based on intelligence. But the way Taco comes into his own is just so cool. And
it's really satisfying.
Yeah,
It's
and
like-
yeah. Sorry.
No, you go. I don't know how to do this.
Oh God, I mean, he's probably the meanest out of everyone. He's biting and sarcastic, but you can tell the people that he cares about deeply because he is biting and sarcastic to them.
Yeah, he's the kind of mean that like he has really high walls,
Mhm.
and so doesn't let people in ever in this way that's really, really compelling instead of frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, the moments when his walls come down feel satisfying and feel real.
Yeah.
And Taco is this character who goes through one of, I think, the most complicated character arcs I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And started out as in the words of the player, an idiot wizard who just has no idea what's going on at any time. And it's amazing. And that's what I like again about actual plays. You get Justin, the guy who plays Taco, spent the whole podcast thinking about Taco. And so his character development was really in-depth and really complicated because someone was thinking about it a lot.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to note for a lot of people, diversity is very important. Taco is explicitly gay. And of course, that's not, that's only really brought up in one instance. He doesn't have a lot of boyfriends coming in and out. He does have one major boyfriend. And they're very explicit about the fact that it's not because they don't want to touch on the fact that Taco's gay. It's because all of the people playing the game are related.
And they feel weird about role-playing romance at all, which is extremely funny.
Yep. But
So the only relationships are between NPCs because it's the DM role-playing with himself.
Yeah, the major relationships that I think a lot of people super latch onto are the ones between NPCs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, we
My
have
personal favorite.
Yeah, my Crunchy Boy.
Oh God.
Clint McElroy, their dad, plays a cleric, a dwarven cleric named Merle Highchurch. Though if you ask him, he might say his name is something totally different.
Because also his sub race in D&D, like how Taco's a high elf, Merle is a beach dwarf.
Yeah.
He lives on the beach. Like it's just like the fun. Like that's not how dwarves work at all. But I think that Merle is just like a boatload of contradictions in the funniest possible way.
Yeah. Like Clint McElroy does not he still kind of, I don't know how much of it is him just playing it up for laughs because that's what people know him for, but he so very obviously doesn't know how to play D&D.
Absolutely.
It bleeds into Merle thinking that he can do something and never being able to.
Or doing something that totally doesn't do what he expects it to, or doing something that doesn't work, or not doing anything at all.
Or he's the one that probably gets beat up the most. But you never feel bad for him. You just kind of laugh at him. Because he's fucking, I mean, Clint doesn't feel bad about it either. He'll play up that he's angry, but in reality, I think, he loves it. He loves, I think at some point he told Griffin that he doesn't care if, or he would actually like Merle to die.
Yeah, which is such an interesting way to go into playing D&D, and I think it reflects on this character so much, in that, I play D&D a lot, and I try to protect my characters. I like them, I want to keep playing them, and there's a level of, I don't care if this character dies, that allows for such potential with just, doing the absolute most ridiculous possible option at any time, which I think if you were playing with someone like that in a serious campaign, it'd be tough to deal with, but in a campaign where it's all about laughter and hope and enjoying yourself, he fits in beautifully.
Yeah. Merle also has a very interesting arc where he kind of goes into it not really caring about the religion that he says he worships, and
which is so funny.
Yeah, he's a cleric that could give a shit. Several times he tries to jump ship, and worship something else, or like, and his god does everything he can to keep him around. It's something that you don't see a lot from clerics, because usually clerics are trying and vying so hard for their god's attention, and Merle's god, Pan, won't leave him alone.
Yeah, right. Merle's a Panite, and so has this sort of like, in this weird sort of way, has this extremely like laid back idea about religion, which I'm not sure this was intentional, but it absolutely mirrors like Pan as a god.
Mm-hmm.
Like Merle is so chill and just like down for pretty much anything at any time in a way that's
including down for fucking plants.
Yeah, he's got the arbor ardor, as they describe it. It's the most cursed phrase I've ever heard, and it makes me so happy.
There's a couple scenes where Clint flirts with some plants and makes his sons very uncomfortable.
It's one of maybe the funniest things I've ever heard.
Oh,
it's just like, because like that's part of it, is that like they're all related, and so like they know each other like the back of their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them have been doing podcasts for years together, and so there's this level of like they often know exactly how to play off each other or how to set the other one up for an amazing moment.
Yes.
There's this level of like of just like being in sync with stuff, but also knowing what buttons to push to make someone like a little annoyed or a little bit or make someone laugh really hard or make them like a little confused or frustrated or uncomfortable in ways that always end up being really funny for the listener.
Yep. And I think Clint especially is very, very good at that, and he knows exactly when, like, there are some moments and that are set up by him that he just kind of dives right in and creates these beautiful moments. And that's kind of a lot of the show, especially in the second half of it, is that once they're all in sync and they know what they're doing, like, there are some moments that in the rules of D&D probably shouldn't happen.
Literally shouldn't happen.
Yeah,
like
they
using
really,
spells
really
to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, but it creates such a perfect moment that Griffin wouldn't dare take that away from them.
Griffin is the DM, by the way.
Yes,
and,
Griffin is the DM.
And I realize we never actually explained the story of this podcast. So to put it very briefly, it's these three doofuses get hired by a secret organization called the Bureau of Balance, hence this title of the arc being Balance.
Yeah.
And they're told about the 7 grand relics, these 7 magical artifacts that are extremely powerful and extremely dangerous. And the leader of the Bureau of Balance, Madam Director, basically sends them on quests to retrieve these artifacts. And each arc, or each like little story, is a different relic. So like they're all different types. They each cover a different category of a different school of magic. Yeah, that's the word. I totally blanked on that one.
Yeah.
And it really lends itself to like podcasting form, because like you get these sort of shorter arcs that like are kind of contained, but also like these characters travel with you through the whole thing, and so you sort of see them grow, but also like you don't need to keep track of 700 characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of characters, they don't just kind of fall off the map, they come back. So Griffin doesn't have to be constantly making up new characters. There's kind of a group of 20 or 30 that just keep coming around, and even I think it's probably even smaller than that, probably 15.
I'd say about that, because one thing that I think I don't know if how many of our listeners play D&D or listen to D&D podcasts. One of the things I think the Adventure Zone does that I think a lot of campaigns and podcast shows could probably do with is what they call a lunar interlude. Because, very minor spoiler, the Bureau of Balance's base is on the moon. And so between arcs, they'll go to the moon, level up, restock on gear, basically take a little break, have some character moments, do something silly, eat some unicorn dick, whatever.
I think that is something that is sorely needed, because it kind of also gives the listener an opportunity to be like, all right, that was the end of this thing. Now we're gonna have a little bit of a break, and I can give myself a break, and now we're going to go into the next one. It really, having these clear lines is something that I try to do now in the campaigns that I'm writing myself. Most of my campaigns I don't write myself because I'm lazy. But in the campaigns that I do write, I want to have those moments of chill, because that is just something that I think is, it also helps kind of build up the world and give your characters a place to have a home base, because I think a lot of D&D stories are just always moving, always going. You don't really have a place for your characters to sleep and eat, and it's a place that they can call home and store all of their stupid magic items that they got over the time. I think they also do magic items amazingly. They have during the Lunar Interludes, they get tokens for the Fantasy Gashapon machine, where they get.
A Gashapon is one of those things where you put a quarter in and you spin the dial and you get like a little capsule out. I didn't know that, so I spent a long time trying to figure out what the hell they were talking about. But it's just like one of those little like quarter in, turn the key things.
Yeah, they're usually like seen at the dentist or at supermarkets. They're all over the place, but they get random magic items that are incredibly powerful. And sometimes
usually suggested by the listener.
Yes. Sometimes they never use them. And that's kind of a running joke, is that they have all these magic items that they never use or never even think to use. But it's still, funny seeing them have them. And Magnus is pretty much the only one who ever uses them, because he's the only non-magical person. So any magic he can get, he's going to use. And then they have Fantasy Costco, which is Costco.
Oh my god.
It's a Costco run by an ethereal being whose form shall never be known to man.
Yep. He's purposefully never described physically in any way.
He has thighs. That's all we know.
The only description we get is that he at one point has thighs. Oh my god. And his name is Garfield, so everyone just assumes he's a big cat.
Yeah, he's a lasagna cat.
It's pretty great.
And Fantasy Costco is literally just a supermarket where they can buy general items from D&D 5th edition, or they can buy magic items that both Griffin and the listeners have come up with. And there's a lot of really cool stuff there. And also, because I'm lazy, I have put those items in my campaigns too.
It's pretty great.
Yeah, I think it's a cool way to give your characters items and let them choose what items they want, instead of kind of forcing on them something that you think that they might want.
Yeah, instead of like finding a big chest at the end of the dungeon that has like a really powerful sword and like some whatever in it, like you often get much more interesting options because the player will pick strange things.
Yeah.
For example, one of them there was this box that was just like a mystery box. You had no idea what was inside. It was like 100 gold or something, or like maybe more expensive than that, but it was pretty inexpensive. And one of the guys was like, okay, and Magnus bought it. He said, I'm going to buy this. And inside was a tiny ball with a little goldfish inside. And that is a magical goldfish who's never hurt, but just hangs out with them forever. And he hangs on Magnus's belt, and now he has a goldfish friend.
Yeah, Travis was complaining almost the entire campaign that he wanted a pet, and Griffin gave him a pet.
A goldfish.
He gave him a goldfish. He did want a dog, though. He was kind of bummed it wasn't a dog.
I think that also speaks to the way the Adventure Zone as a whole sort of, the way they know each other means they can sort of plan for each other's needs, and they work to build moments together. And so like often characters will do stuff that's sort of like will take risks or set up jokes for the other ones to say the punchline of, or like it's clear, it's like such a good example of successful collaborative storytelling.
I think my favorite example of this that isn't super spoilery in the third arc, they are sent on a mission to steal something from a gang, but they're not allowed to kill anyone. And they very quickly forget that they're not allowed to kill anyone. So in the span of one episode, they do this great job trying to lure everyone away so they can sneak in. Someone comes back, finds them, they guess his name wrong, and they have to kill him, and Travis forgets that they're not supposed to kill anyone, so he cuts him in half non-lethally.
Cleaves him in twain. Just like fully, and the DM is like, listen, if you can explain to me how you can cut someone in half non-lethally, I'll let you do it.
And of course they couldn't, and they decided to toss the body off the side of a cliff.
After one of them, and again, one of them's like, oh, they're like, oh, we should get rid of this body, and Merle says something like, oh, you mean we should eat him?
Yeah.
and then someone says, no, you gotta stop suggesting that. I'm just like, they build these little moments that give you so much information about these characters in a way that I can't even imagine translating to like, it's such a D&D time media.
Yeah, and there's moments where they make jokes about other characters when they're not in the room that makes perfect sense. Like there's a moment where Magnus is alone with another character, with an NPC, not with Magnus or Taco, and
Merle.
They make it. Oh, I said, sorry,
you
Merle.
Said Magnus again.
He's not with Magnus. They have
also a recurring bit.
Yeah, that they both have the same first letter. Yep. And they're talking about Taka, or they're talking about something else. They're talking about like what could possibly be in someone's pocket. And then I think it's Carrie that says pudding, and Magnus says, who would put pudding in their pocket? And she says, Taco, I've seen his pudding pocket, it's nasty. And it makes and Justin, I don't think, was in the call for this. He definitely doesn't say anything, because they're all in different parts of the country, so they're always Skyping in. But he doesn't dispute it once they come back. Like, it doesn't seem like something that Taco wouldn't do.
They improv, and so they do the whole yes and always.
Yeah.
And it leads to these moments of just like characters doing like stuff that is absolutely ridiculous, or agreeing to stuff that's ridiculous, or having something in their backstory that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it's funny.
Oh,
and so it's worth it.
I think the only time that the yes and doesn't work, it becomes a big no, is when they try to make Magnus's dick fall off.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
Just keeps yelling that Magnus has a penis.
He's like, Magnus has a huge dick. It's huge. It was so funny.
So I mean, obviously there's
comedy.
There's lowbrow comedy as well as probably a lot of it is stupid humor, but they also just have really, really good long running jokes that like I'm my lizard brain is saying, don't just quote the Rick and Morty thing. You have to have a high IQ to
understand it. Oh my god. The thing is, you absolutely don't. It's one of those podcasts that is like the lowest entry D&D podcast I've ever seen in terms of like prior knowledge, because they know absolutely nothing.
There's a moment where literally it's like 5 minutes after talking to an NPC that Griffin made that is a bard, where Griffin is going through the player's handbook and says, oh look, there's bards in here. Like, he didn't know that bards existed. Like in 5e, I guess.
I think at one point he says, are half orcs a thing?
Yeah.
Which is like great.
It's telling that they in the first episode Griffin explicitly says, we got the early version of the starter pack. They started the Adventure Zone before 5th edition was ever actually released.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what Griffin said. He got like a pre-order of the starter pack.
That
And so
actually makes a lot of sense.
There was nothing. There was nothing for 5e, and they just hopped on that real early. And that it's kind of weird to think about that it's been going for so long, that it really has been that long. Because when you listen to it now, and they make jokes about how they forgot something because it's been 2 months since that thing that they mentioned. It's something that you don't really get the scope of until you're listening to the episodes as they come out, like I am now with the new campaign. And I actually think I enjoy binge listening more than I do listening to it live.
I absolutely
because I also forget. I also forget what's going on. Like, and I also have a hard time paying attention that much. So, like, there was a character that they recently introduced that everyone was freaking out that they had a new non-binary character, and I was like, wait a second, hold on. I literally just listened to that episode. I don't fucking remember any of that. I need to go back and just re-listen all at once when this is over.
Yeah, I think the Adventure Zone really benefits from being like binge listened to. I caught up just as the podcast was ending, which I was really happy with. You caught up after everything was over. Though it was incredible watching Alex listen to this podcast.
We were literally like, it's not roommates in the sense that we lived in the same apartment. We were literally in the same room.
We're college students. We were in a dorm together.
Yeah.
And so like Alex would play the podcast out loud, and we'd sit and listen to it. It was my like second, and I think I had listened to it like 1.5 times by that point. And so like I got to sort of see it from a totally different perspective.
And me get something completely spot on correct with my stupid theories, or something horrendously wrong. Like
Alex managed to, out of the blue, guess like the biggest series mystery, just like goofing around.
Yeah, I made a dumb joke about a character coming back, and turns out.
Yeah. It took all the effort I possess as a human to not like audibly scream.
That's a reason why this is not a full spoiler episode like most of our reviews are, Capers, because of course this is such a niche thing. I want you guys to go listen to it. I told Scott about this, and he told me that he probably couldn't ever listen to someone play D&D because he would always want to be like, no, you play it like I would do it this way, or I would do it that way. I never get that feeling, and I want people to go listen to this. I want more people to talk about it. And of course it has a huge fan base, and it's not hurting for viewers or anything. The McElroys are essentially like kings of a massive empire of podcast and internet stuff. But like, if I can find someone, just like one person to get to listen to this, I will do it. I had a friend that I hadn't spoken to for 3 years, and over this past month, he messaged me again. We started talking again, and I half mentioned the Adventure Zone, and he got through all of it in the next 2 weeks after that, and he was messaging me constantly about it. It is just something that, like, you don't need. There's no barrier of entry at all. It's a great way to like dip your feet in for D&D. I think I had only played D&D once before I listened to this, or once or twice, and I totally renewed my sense of what my characters can be. And it just made me really appreciate D&D way more.
I absolutely agree. Until that point, I had played like one time, or I'd played in one campaign that was online and was kind of spotty to begin with. And what the Adventure Zone also did for me was it kind of recontextualized the way I think about playing D&D. Because like, I was one of those people who like really wanted kind of an emotional arc for the characters I was playing. Mm-hmm. I tend to be someone who's really I personally am like more of a horror writer and like more of a dramatic than a comedic person. And so I kind of wanted that. And I think I underestimated the power that comedy can have in a D&D podcast, and lightness, and just sort of that kind of refreshing feeling of being able to spend time with your friends and laugh together.
Yeah, that, like, I think before the Adventure Zone, I would, like, we're in a campaign right now together that I'm running. I think I would have been angry at you guys for laughing at things like Dick Church. We had an entire we had almost an entire session where people were just laughing at the fact that the description for a church was that it had a bulging steeple. And we couldn't stop laughing about that. And like this is Curse of Strahd, so it's a very serious and very dark campaign. There's a lot of aspects where like children are being kidnapped and captured and people die all the time. There's vampires. It's highly inspired by like Dracula and has a, like kind of a bloodborne Victorian aesthetic. But we are just almost all the time laughing about something really stupid.
And we also still have those moments of like fear and sadness and difficult decisions to make and like uncomfortable silences and like the things that come, I mean, within the characters, not like among ourselves as players. It's like it taught me that like D&D is as much comedy as it is tragedy, and one way or the other, because like Adventure Zone starts out very, very comedic, and then slowly becomes a more complicated blend of comedic and tragic. I mean, like comedic and dramatic. Like it's never like tragedy, but it is drama, I think. It's hard to pick a genre for it because every arc is kind of a different genre. Like one is a Western, one is like science fiction.
A lot of them are based on movies or TV shows. I think like the second arc is a murder mystery. It's very Agatha Christie. Murder on the Orient Express.
Third arc is Fast and the Furious.
And Mad Max.
Fourth arc is Alien and like science fiction films.
Yeah.
And then like it goes to like Westerns and like it's really, really cool. It's just really cool.
Yeah.
And I want people to listen not because like what you said before about like the McElroys are doing fine. Like they have a pretty big listener base. That's not why I want people to listen to this podcast. I want people to listen because of the things you get out of it. Like every person I know has found something within it to connect with.
Yep.
Including me. Like I found characters that like I never thought I'd connect with as hard as I did. Like I'm kind of jokingly known for connecting really, really hard with this very minor character. And I don't know why, but something about this character just like hooked my attention, and it kind of speaks to the richness of the world that I can even do that I can take like a secondary, tertiary character and be like, yes, that's the one's my favorite. I love him. I want to just talk about him all the time.
Yeah. And I think everyone kind of just has their character that they latch onto. I'm still finding mine, but I did listen to this about a year after a very personal tragedy. A family member of mine died. And one of the characters became the embodiment of that person for me. And just like it has helped me through a lot of personal stuff, and I think that has helped a lot of people through a lot of personal stuff, and because it's been going so long and it's so big, and I know that sounds intimidating, but honestly I've personally not liked long form stuff. People suggest to me anime anime shows that have been going on for like ever and have tons of hours of content, and that scares the hell out of me. But this was so easy to get into, especially since you can be the podcast. So obviously we don't have to sell podcasts to these listeners. But I mean, you could be doing other things. I think I played Slime Rancher for most of my time listening to this, so that was really fun.
I played Minecraft. I watered the plants outside my house. I went on walks. I walked my dog. I did all like different sorts of stuff, and Though I will say, I think the only barrier to entry, I think, and the one that I hit me really hard is like a lot of people have a lot of trouble with the first arc.
Yeah.
Like the very first story, it's called Here There Be Gerblins. It's extremely, it's more kind of jokey than the other ones are. It doesn't really let it have serious moments. And I think there are two ways around this that I've found that both of them work. What I did, because I listened to this podcast about 2 years ago now. Wow, that feels like a long time. Oh boy, but yeah, it's about a year and a half now. Um, and what I did was I listened to a live show. They have a series of live shows they do where they play as these characters and like do something that isn't really necessarily related to the plot. So if you're not totally caught up, it doesn't really matter. And also so they can release it at any time. And the one I listened to is the Boston live show where they go to what is essentially fantasy WrestleMania.
Mhm.
And after that, I listened to that. I had very little context for what was going on. I didn't really know the characters. I didn't really know the world. But oh my God, it hooked me. Like that is what finally got me to listen, was like seeing where this thing eventually kind of ends up and wanting to know, like having that little taste made me want more. And the other way that I've heard people can get into it is a more recent one, and like Alex reviewed it. It's the graphic novel. The graphic novel is the first arc, and I think part of the reason they did it is because it's hard sometimes to get through.
Yeah.
And so the graphic novel version is kind of edited down.
There are story elements that are brought in earlier.
Yeah,
Merle doesn't actually, in the podcast, Merle doesn't actually start worshipping Pan until the second arc. And in order to, and they changed that for the graphic novel, so that he was always a Panite, which of course makes way more sense because they didn't know what they were doing story-wise until, I think Griffin says that he didn't really have a full picture of it until the fourth arc. So this book and this series, because the second one is coming out in June, I think. Yeah, they now have the full picture. They know everything that's going to happen. So now it's mainly written by Clint, who has a background in writing for comic books, and it's drawn by Carrie Peach, who of course has done Lumberjanes, and I can't remember the other names of the stuff that she works on, but she's been all over the place in the indie comics scene, and she's fantastic.
It's a phenomenal graphic novel. Like, I think even without the context of like even the show, it holds up really well. It's really funny, and they did a really good job of like translating some of like the audio gags to visual gags.
Yes.
Also, what they did, because there was no way around it, is they're like, it's like they're playing a D&D campaign, and so like Griffin,
the names
like
are
the
copyrighted.
DM, yeah, so they can't use all the characters from Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is great because they sort of diverged after a certain point. So like they just changed them all, and
it only will affect some characters from this arc. It won't, like, going forward. I think the only problem that they'll have is some town names that they come back to, or names of spells. I think those will be somewhat of a problem. Of course, not all of it, like Firebolts or Magic Missile. Those are not copyrighted. They can use it whenever they want. But things like Tasha's Hideous Laughter, I don't think they ever use that in the show, but
they do.
They do? Okay, they
Wonderland.
Right, yeah, and they'll have to they'll have to change the name of that probably.
Which, like, again, that's such like a surface level detail that like the only thing I had to really tell people going in is that like the names were different, because like people who read the first arc and then listen to the podcast oftentimes get a little bit like confused with the names. But honestly, like you can ask anybody, and it's pretty simple stuff. And honestly, what I know some people did was they read the graphic novel, started listening to the podcast, and then went back and listened to the first arc, because now they were interested enough to do that.
Mm-hmm. And the and my review, I mentioned that it's like it's not that big of a deal that any of the names are changed. Oh god, that was my brain.
Some of them are funny. Some of them are much, much, much funnier.
Yeah, and if you listen to the podcast before you listen to the show, there's that funny idea of thinking that Clint is writing this, so it's very possible that Merle is just recounting this and he doesn't remember anyone's name.
That's pretty great, actually. Sounds about right, because Merle,
Yeah.
because Clint never remembers any details, so Merle gets his own name wrong more than once.
Yeah, he calls himself Merle Hightower at some point.
Yeah, and then he says it's his middle name, so he's Merle Hightower Highchurch, which is just, oh boy.
And he at some point, I mean, this is not something he just forgot. He just didn't know the word prostrate. He said he was praying.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
He's praying to Pan, and he said, "I prostrate myself before you." And everyone was like,
went. Every person, like all three of them went, nope, nope, that's not what you mean. Nope, nope, no, nope, 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 nope.
He gets characters that he came up with wrong. Like the names that not just Merle, but like other characters from his backstory, he just totally gets wrong. And of course, I do that too. I think at some point, like I do that super hard. Is I'll like just read the first letter of the name and then not get the rest of it right at all.
Or you'd get it wrong the first time, and then we'd all think it's one thing, and you'd be reading it correctly for the rest of the time, and we'd be confused.
Yeah, that's something that has happened so many times in our campaign.
But like I think that's like kind of also what the Adventure Zone does is it teaches you like it's kind of lays all the pitfalls out in front of you and lets you laugh at them.
Yeah.
Like getting things wrong, getting like really, really, really messing up a spell or an ability check or something. Like the Adventure Zone fails, like the characters fail a lot. And when they do, it's amazing and it's better.
Yeah. That's and even when they do fail to the point of like no return, there's a running joke where almost every single time there is a competent woman there to save them.
Yep.
There is at least one in every arc there to save their asses. I think except maybe the second to last one, because there's no saving anyone in that one.
Yeah.
That one's rough. But it's not like a bad rough, like it's hard to listen to. It's a rough of like, oh no, these characters that I love so much are being tortured.
Which also like it stands to its ability to like get you to connect to these doofuses.
Yeah.
Like it's a wizard named Taco. Like he's just ridiculous.
And all three of them torture a small child for almost the entirety of the show, and you still love them somehow.
One of my favorite lines ever in the whole podcast is there's this little boy. He's not really a spoiler because he's just too good. You can't talk about the podcast without mentioning him. He's Angus MacDonald, the world's greatest detective. He's about 11 or 12. And in one of the arcs, he gets, in one of the live shows, he gets thrown a magical artifact. And they're trying to, like, keep the villain from getting it. And Taco says, keep away, play keep away. And Angus is like, I don't know what that is. And Magnus says, it's what we do with your books. And just like this kind of like, they're all no one in this podcast is ever like a quote unquote like good person.
Yeah.
But they do great things.
Yeah, it's obvious that Angus warps into Griffin's self-insert because of how badly everyone else treats him. Griffin's the youngest brother.
Yep.
So Angus is treated like the youngest brother. By a bunch
of weird adults.
Yeah. And so they mess with him, but ultimately they care about him except for Merle.
Merle, then.
Yeah.
I know you said Taco might be the meanest. I think it might actually go to Merle.
Yeah. Merle does threaten to actually murder him a few times.
But like in ways that are always like that are always really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And like Merle is a jerk. Like, he's actually genuinely a jerk.
And not just for the sake of being a jerk. Like, Clint has this whole thing where he like, Merle is scared that Angus will replace him in the group, so he is constantly trying to kick him out and get rid of him, which is
because he's self-conscious.
Yeah, he's totally self-conscious, and it's something that, like, it's a kind of depth that you wouldn't expect, but it's still, like, there's so much care and thought put into these three big, massive idiots,
Yep.
and they all four of them give it their absolute 100% with every character, even, like, and even Griffin, who has to do romance scenes with himself, he pours his heart and soul into every single character. Each voice is crazy and weird and different, and it's just something that, like, I feel like is special, that I don't think there's gonna ever be anything like the Balance arc ever again.
And the Balance arc also is like, it's tough to talk about, because there's a sort of, like, larger story that gets. Griffin didn't the DM didn't really even think about it until later in the story. So in the beginning, it doesn't show up at all, really. It shows up in little bits, but not significantly. And it doesn't really come up until very, very late in the game. And so you sort of. Alex and I have a context for the actions of these characters that is really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
That the first listen through you don't get.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a shame, but it also means that, like, this story was told in a way that was totally different than most other types of stories, because the DM knew where this was going, and nobody else did. Like,
there's unintentional foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
Like, it's
characters guess about things that are going to happen or have already happened they don't know about, in ways that are uncanny and fascinating.
And things that sometimes even Griffin doesn't know are going to happen.
Yep.
He has no idea that stuff is going to happen, and then he ends up writing it in later, and then, like, potentially just forgetting about it, forgetting that someone had even mentioned that it could have been a thing, 70 episodes earlier. Of course, that's an exaggeration, because there literally isn't 70 episodes.
Well, there are live shows. I guess it kind of is. The last episode is about 3 hours, about 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And I think it's partially because they wanted to end on episode 69.
Hell yeah.
Which is like,
they also couldn't find a place to cut it.
But that's like, I think there's, like, I bet if they really had to cut it, they could have. Yeah. It would have been kind of awkward, but they could have done it. The fact it ended on episode 69, I think, sums up the way this podcast feels, in just terms of, like, the level of, like, it's beautiful. That last episode made me cry a lot. But, like, not like, oh no, tragedy, but, like, just, like, I was happy and I was overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's a very, very satisfying ending.
Which is, like, tough to do. It's really, really tough to do.
Yeah.
And, like, of course, it's not perfect. There are some moments where it's, like, kind of weird, or, like, stuff happens that, like, doesn't make any sense, or, like, they spend, like, a whole episode fighting, like, 3 leeches in a bog, and it is, like, the hardest thing to fucking listen to.
Yeah.
Oh my god. It's the only thing I skip over every time, is them fighting the stupid leeches. But, like, beyond that, it all sort of flows in this really this, like, weirdly cohesive picture.
Yeah.
Which the graphic novels are kind of ironing out the very, like, the wrinkly bits, like, the bits that are like, oh, this doesn't quite fit. And the graphic novel is, like, making it fit in ways that, like, don't feel disingenuous.
I am super curious on how they fix the kind of major plot hole that the meta narrative can't address, because it just it's complicated to talk around, but there's just the way Griffin created the basis for the entire story, the kind of thing that started the relics and everything they need to find in the big overarching narrative as a whole, conflicts directly with something that happens in the first arc, and it is impossible to ignore that. And it and he kind of half explains it. It's the only time that happens. It's the only time
there's
that
one. It's funny he mentioned he mentioned being like thinking about, okay, this works perfectly. Ah, fuck. And like having the moment of like realizing that like one piece doesn't fit and just having to
Yeah.
like kind of cut the piece to fit the puzzle. And
Yeah.
just sort of like slapping some
'Cause
tape
even
on
if you-
like this is okay.
Even if you cut out that first if you cut that out of the first arc, that arc doesn't go the same way.
Yeah.
It literally cannot. And even if you try to explain it away of like, well, not really, it can't.
The thing is, honestly though, like there's a level of like competence in terms of storytelling and a love for this story that makes me trust they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It may not be like the most satisfying solution, but like this podcast was satisfying in 1,000 other ways.
Yeah.
And if this one thing sucks, I'm okay.
Yep. Definitely.
I'm cool being horrendously disappointed with this one minor plot point for the immense satisfaction of actually having listened and loved this podcast the way I have.
Yeah. The graphic novel also gives the first like quote unquote official look other than the cover of the podcast, which no longer is the cover of the podcast on iTunes and stuff. I don't like that. I don't like the looks for any of them in that one. Magnus is bald, which I'm not a fan of. But
Taco looks like he just like walked out of a swamp. Like it's real weird.
Yeah.
And it's clearly like this art was done in the very beginning when these characters had not yet really taken form, and so like the fact that like now they can sort of though they have like officially confirmed that the characters have no kind of canon appearance because like that's not how podcasting works, and like part of the benefit of the genre is the ability to sort of let people create their own images about like the things in the podcast.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate once that art came out from Carrie Peach, the first art of Magnus, Merle, and Taco, the cover. There was a lot of debate about what they should look like, especially Taco. I think because so many people really latch on to Taco and have this idea of what he should be. A lot of people think that he should be Hispanic, but they didn't want to make him explicitly Hispanic because he spends the first arc and several arcs afterwards stealing everything he can, and that would be iffy. And then people say, well, he should... Like, there's so many things that people think Taco should be, and then they ended up making him blue.
Which, like, to be fair, within the canon, moon elves are a subset of high elves and can be blue.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's not, like... It's complicated. Like, I'm not... It's a lot.
Yeah, and I understand why they did it, and I like that, like, even Justin himself has, like, he has made funny suggestions about who he pictures playing Taco. He pictures Titus Burgess from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, who looks nothing like graphic novel Taco. He is he's not this, like, Taco in the graphic novel is, like, a rail.
He's kind of...
so skinny.
Yeah.
And Titus Burgess, of course, is known for being not that, and he's also black. Like, it's a very different look for Taco, but the energy of Taco is there.
Yes.
As long as the Taco vibe is there, Taco can look like anything.
And the same thing with Magnus. Like, there's a million different Magnuses, and I think Travis mentioned the fact that, like, in his head, there are at least, like, 7 or 8 different versions of Magnus, and all of them are equally Magnus. And he's, like, one of the ones he said was, like, he saw Moana, and suddenly there was a Magnus in his head that was, like, a big, like, after Maui and Moana, like, this kind of big Polynesian guy.
He also said that, like, Terry Crews is someone that he would want to see play Magnus. There is no one version of these guys.
So all the Merles look the same.
Yeah, all the Merles look exactly the same with varying skin tones.
Yep, they're all, like, short, weird, huge beard, Hawaiian shirt, shorts. Yeah. Usually, like, flip-flops.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing. It's amazing.
It's hilarious how uniform his look is. Like,
you can often tell it's Adventures in Art because of how Merle looks, even if you can't recognize the other two.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's like, okay, well, There's Morale. I mean, he has later down the line he gets some very distinct features that
Yeah.
Which adds to him getting the shit kicked out of him all the time.
I love him so much. Oh, he's so great.
Oh god, I love him. He's such a crunchy, gross. He's great though.
He's gross and bad, and like he's both. He's like also like he both is weirdly sexual, and also like the absolute least sexual person you ever want to think about. And also,
in one of the live shows, Taco describes him as the body that God forgot, or something like that.
I forgot about that, but that's about right. Because it's their dad, and so like the dad kind of knows like what is. He often kind of plays up the fact that he's their dad, and will say like weird stuff to like make his sons kind of go, "Ew, gross."
Yeah.
And that also kind of like works to make Merle like more complicated. I don't know. I've like I've said, a lot of people find characters they really connect to.
Yeah.
A lot of people really connect to Taco. Like Taco is a character that a ton of people I know find really comforting. I more connect with Merle.
Yeah.
Which is probably says some. I don't know what it says about me, but I love him.
I think
as much as interesting.
As much as I try to like, because that's not like the aesthetic of character that I super like. I think Magnus is the person that I relate to the most. I don't like playing big buff fighters. I've done it once now, and I think I'm finally getting used to that character. But I don't like. There's in the show there's a running phrase that Magnus rushes in, Taco's good out here, and Merle casts Zone of Truth. I'm not
sort of indicates that Magnus is impulsive, Taco's reluctant, and Merle's incompetent.
Yeah.
To sum it up, basically.
Yeah, and I'm not a Russian head first kind of person. I'm very much more like Taco, but I think just Magnus's story and his arc is something that I latch onto so much. That it's just something that I don't know. It feels boring to like Magnus more than the other characters, but like versus these very loud personalities. But I just love my good ref boy and everything.
I think it's super fair. I also think it's I get what you mean by like feeling like it's more boring, and I think it's because like Magnus, in at least like we were talking about this before, they're all kind of very standard characters conceptually, and I think Magnus is the best example of that.
Yeah.
Like Taco like has a vibe and like an aesthetic that kind of immediately sets him apart from most wizards. And Merle is like a beach dwarf, and like from the minute Clint is kind of a strange role player sometimes, and it leads to these incredibly strange conversations, which build this Merle as such a fascinating character. And Magnus is kind of the most standard fantasy character, but he also has one of the most deep, like, emotional lives that I've ever seen in a character. It's really fascinating.
He feels so generic, but there's something about that I really like, that I think Travis does it really well. There's a story that goes around a lot about the production of Harry Potter, where the director of the first movie asked Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and
Emma Watson
to write an essay about their characters. Emma came in with 16 pages. Rupert came in with nothing, and Daniel Radcliffe came in with like a half a page. Like, that feels so much like Magnus is Emma Watson, and Travis very much like he wrote out this epic backstory for Magnus, and that is something that like Magnus is way more methodical and tries to look at things in as creative a lens as he possibly can within the rules of the game. He examines everything in the room, what he can do with it, where Taco feels like he just wants to do the coolest thing he possibly can, and then step back and let everyone else do something. Like, okay, I did my thing. You do yours now.
Yeah, I think he literally says that at one point.
Yeah, And
I did my part, you do yours.
Yeah, and then Merle is just, he has no idea what the fuck is going on.
For example, in a live show, they were trying to be stealthy. Like, they were trying to be quiet, sneak around. Merle casts Insect Swarm
Yeah.
and fills a hallway with, like, locusts for no reason. Like, they're in a kitchen. Like, there's no... But it leads to this moment of, like... I think there's a moment of, like, total silence where everyone is like, wait, you do what? And then he's like, should I not do this? And they're like, no, you're doing it. You do that. You're doing this now. And then it sort of had to play out. And so you ended up with like these moments that like are just outlandish, but
at some point he tries to cast Resurrection on a skeleton, and like not only does he not have that spell, it also takes an hour to cast, which is some time that they did not have in game.
It's just he tries so many things and gets shot down because he doesn't know how to play the game, but it kind of makes Merle this character who is just like gets knocked down, gets back up again, like the character who just has this sort of like unending resilience of like, oh, okay, let's keep going.
There's a really funny live stream that I only watched the beginning of. I didn't watch all of it, but it was I think it was on the D&D Twitch channel, and Clint was playing with a bunch of other people who had been in other actual play stuff, a lot of people from Critical Role, and he said that he wanted to cast something, and the DM was like, no, I know what you can cast, and it's not that. He's like, well, my DM lets me do whatever I want. And they're like, your DM is also your son. So...
I need to watch that.
It's very fun, because a lot of it is Ashley Johnson, who was sitting right next to him. She's on Critical Role, and she's a sweetheart. She was just helping him, like, figure out what he could do.
She also plays a cleric.
Yeah.
Merle's also the reason I'm, like, in D&D, I've played primarily clerics. I've played almost exclusively clerics at this point, actually. And it's partially because of Merle. Because of this like idea that like clerics don't need to be these hyper religious, like devout, unquestioning characters. Like there's an idea you get of like a cleric that's kind of very fantasy specific, and then Merle sort of breaks that down. He talks to Pan like a friend. He's like, oh hey Pan, what's up? Like that's sort of and Pan's like, hey Merle, how's it going? What's going on with you? Like just this sort of like God voice, chill atmosphere, and I'm like, oh, I like this. I want to play this. I want to explore this.
Yeah, I'm like, and I think that this show like definitely it gave me a new appreciation for fighters. Like
same.
I hate fighter. Like I hated playing fighters, and now that I'm playing my own fighter, I appreciate it a lot more. I still was very cautious about going full in on the fighter. I actually played a subclass of fighter called Arcane Archer, which meant that I was still standing back and shooting things while also being a tank, which is just totally counterproductive. And I think now I'm finally letting myself be more of the fighter that I'm supposed to be. And I think it also gives like no one usually thinks of a D&D campaign as 4 people. Usually parties are 4 or 5, not 3. 3 is dangerous. 3 is something that they do not recommend. But it works so well. And I think that it given a good group of people, 3 is awesome.
Yeah. And I also like what I like about Magnus as a fighter is we talked about this a little bit earlier, in that Magnus is kind of a fighter who is so concerned about the well-being of others. Like it's part of his whole thing is that he is self-sacrificing. He is selfless. He is impulsive.
Rustic hospitality.
People love him, but his subclass within fighter is a protection fighter, meaning that like he gets bonuses and is really, really good at keeping other people safe. And it is one of like the best examples I've seen of like a subclass really informing and building a character, because Magnus at his core is a protector, is a protection fighter, and I can't imagine him being any other class. It's like one of the few true like harmonious class character things I've ever seen. Like, it's just a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. And I think all three of them, I think, work so well to their subclasses, because once they like actually hit level 3 and during like the first lunar interlude, like you can already see them figuring out what they want to do. You wouldn't expect that Tako is a transmutation wizard, but after listening to the entire show, of course he's a transmutation wizard. There's no possible way he could be anything else.
Yeah. And these characters feel like people, and they feel so complicated in a way that, like, I think D&D lends itself to really specifically, and it's just beautiful. Like, it really is. Like, I don't even know how to express the amount of, like, love and, like, affection I have for this podcast. And also because the people it's led me to, the community is I've made so many friends. My friends with my relationship with other people have become stronger. Like, I think Alex and I are closer friends for having like talked about this podcast together. My brother and I listen to it together, and there are these two brothers who are like, there's like a minor subplot with these two brothers who are total opposites in terms of like their actual goals, but come together to like do something that really needs to be done, and kind of reconcile that like there are many ways to do something that it helped me and my brother like kind of get a little bit closer. Like it's the care that's put into the world of the Adventure Zone lends itself to stories that people care about. And so like I have a million characters that I'm like, oh, I love this character, I love this character, I love, because you can tell that Griffin and the other players love them too.
Yeah. And even when Griffin fucks up and plays into a trope that he didn't even know existed, he fixes it. He recognizes his mistake, he understands, and then he doesn't just do it better the next time it's possible. He fixes the one he fucked up. And it's a beautiful moment that really no one was expecting. But
felt good.
And felt right. Yeah, and it wasn't just like shoved in there. It was something that it felt right, and it was perfect for that moment. And it wasn't like without consequences. Like it didn't get just totally fixed and whatever. Of course, it's hard to explain this without going into spoiler territory.
A lot.
There's so much of it. There are full characters that even just mentioning their names
we can't talk about
spoiler. Like,
right, and they're my favorite character. I can't even talk about it all. Like, I can't. I'm so bummed about it.
It sucks. Like, there's like we were mentioning like before we even started really recording. We were mentioning like talking about the diversity of the show. There is a trans character. She's a trans woman, and we cannot tell you anything about her except for that. We cannot tell you her name.
We can't tell you where. We can't tell you how we know her, where she comes from, what her deal is.
We can't tell you when you see her in the show. You can't, like, there is nothing we can tell you about her, and she is probably one of the best characters in the show.
Oh, undoubtedly, she's like maybe the best character in the whole show. Like, no, like full stop, no questions asked. And like it means that like this show is so hard to sell to other people. It's like you gotta just wait it out and get there. And I promise you'll meet these incredible.
Yeah. There's and
but it's
yeah, this is like the diversity of the show is definitely something that attracted me to it. As a bisexual person, there is not a lot of but the representation I think is still fairly new. In the scope that like there's a lot of things that I enjoy that I just kind of live with the fact that I'm never gonna see someone who's queer on it. Like I would, and this is something that I've heard has changed, and I appreciate that. But there was a long time where when I was watching RWBY, the reason why I stopped watching that show is because I understood that I didn't think I was ever going to see queer characters on that show or dark-skinned characters treated well on that show. So I gave up. I don't think, and even though I've heard that it's gotten better, I don't think that I'm going to be on a episode of Podcapers talking about RWBY anytime soon. But this show, I think, for every single person on this show is white, cis, straight, and a man. And they do diversity way better than a lot of other things do.
Yeah, like, and I think like the character, the trans woman character, was someone I actually got spoiled for me, which was weird because I got spoiled for me in a way that didn't make any sense, and then I immediately forgot about it. But it was something that like inspired me to listen. Like,
I think I saw fan art of her fairly early on and got really confused because it didn't have her name, it just had her face. And so I was like, wait a second, what? How?
who is she? I know that like I saw something that was literally like, hey, look, the Adventure Zone recently introduced a transgender character, just so you know, if people want to listen.
Yeah.
But I was like, and like, but it told us who she was,
Mhm.
and I was like, okay. So I went into the podcast knowing all of it, and it was kind of weird, but like, it in like as a trans person, like there's not a lot of trans rep at all anywhere, and so
Yeah.
like, knowing that like that this character that like other trans people recommended it to me as
Mhm.
a way of being like this character was done respectfully,
Yeah.
which like that's tough to find.
Mhm.
And I respected it. I respected that a lot.
I think you actually spoiled for me the big queer couple from the second arc.
Yes.
You spoiled their ending of where they were going to end up at the end of the podcast. Which, even though I knew it was coming when I got to that episode, I was bawling. Like, I heard it, I knew it was coming, and I just couldn't. Like, it was a beautiful moment that I was like, oh no, it's here! Oh no, it's here! And it just, it is something that like I mentioned to Scott last time I was on, nothing will ever make me feel that way, I think, again. Like with that the No Man's Land scene in Wonder Woman. Like, it just gave me that same feeling of, oh my god, this is something that I didn't think I was going to be able to see, or I guess hear. And
yeah.
I mean, we're going to be able to see it, which is so fucking awesome. I'm so glad that the graphic novel is a thing, and
I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm so happy.
About the one more thing about those kind of moments that make you feel things that you didn't really expect to feel. I got really attached to a minor character, as I mentioned before, and I can't really talk about him much, and so I won't. But what I will say is there was a moment in this podcast where like this whole character's life changes, like pretty dramatically so. And I remember being hit in like the emotions in a way I did not expect, and just like was crushed immediately in a way that was like not like a tragic, oh god, I feel sad about it, but just like this level of like empathy, and it's a really confusing kind of feeling to get. And later on, it was because I like saw my own personal experiences in this character in a way that like I don't think was intentional. Like I don't think this character was intended to be one that like you really heavily emotionally connect with, but it's one that like I did. And the fact this world is built with such care lends itself to that. That like these characters, even if they're minor, even if they're small, even if they show up only a few times, are treated with the kind of love that allows them to feel like characters you want to connect with.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think we will leave it on that. I'm looking up right now when the release of Murder on the Rockport Limited comes out.
June.
Yeah. July 17th, 2018, is when the second graphic novel is going to be released. I think it's 1-page press or something like that. Macmillan and First Second. That's what it is. Macmillan and First Second Publishing. Definitely go check it out. You can get the first one. It's not super expensive on Amazon. The first chunk of 15 pages for the second one was just released as a preview on IO9. So that's really funny. Cool. It's really cool. And I just went through to see the art for all the characters. I didn't read any of the dialogue. I purposely ignored it because I was like, first of all, I know this dialogue already. Second of all, I don't want to technically know what jokes they shoved in there. And they do it really cool way. Like Griffin actually is a character. Yeah, he like shows up every once in a while to give them pointers and make fun of them for being stupid. And I think it's done really well. So be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, go listen to the Adventure Zone, or go watch the millions of animated shorts that have been made for the Adventure Zone just to get a taste. There's a ongoing project, hopefully, that will be, they keep saying it's going to be next month, and then it's the next month, and then it's the next month, but there's a project where almost the entirety of the 4th episode, which people all pretty much agree that's really the big starting point for the show,
is being animated.
Yeah, it's being totally animated in segments by different artists, similar to the Shrek Revisited or whatever that was.
Oh God, yeah.
Except there's going to be no live action bits. That's also a very interesting project if you want to go look into that. That was weird.
That'd be a hell of a podcast episode.
Yeah, that would be really weird.
I did watch the whole thing, so
yeah,
like I will suggest that to anybody.
It's very weird.
Also, there is a trailer, an animated trailer for the Adventure Zone that was created a few months ago. And if you just kind of go on YouTube and look Adventure Zone trailer, there's an official like animated trailer that like was commissioned by the brothers and features a very different design for Taco, even the one from the graphic novel, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. Merle looks the same because he always looks the same, but in the best way. Yeah. It's a good kind of tonal indicator for the rest of the series. But if you're curious, check it out.
Yeah. Also, music. If you want to just like listen to the music, we didn't mention it in the show, but the fucking music is A+. Griffin doesn't start really using music that much until the end of the 2nd arc, but it is he's never written music before, and it's awesome. It is so
he learns how
cool
to write music for this show,
and it's amazing. Go check it out. Probably the best song that everyone recommends is Wonderland Round 3,
which is the music in the trailer.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, and the opening music, even though it's not done by Griffin, is also awesome. Yeah. And there's he now does music for every episode, including the current arc. If you don't want to listen to the balance arc, because that's too daunting, listen to the current arc. That's Amnesty. They're playing Monster of the Week, and it's very much middle of their home state of West Virginia, in the middle of nowhere, fighting monsters in modern day, and that's a very different feeling, but it's still great. And there are much less episodes. I think like the 21st episode just came out. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoy the show, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to some of our other super episodes, like the one where I was on talking about She-Ra. And you can listen to the show on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, or at podcapers.com. We have a Patreon. Check out the rewards. Patreon.com/AP2HYC. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC, or email us at podcapers@AP2HYC.com. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our logo, the lovely microphone with the red and blue 3D glasses. Those are Scott's, not mine. And thank you for listening. This has been Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. Cue the music!